All right, good afternoon and welcome to our channel. Today I want to discuss who is getting a Section 8 voucher quicker than others. And housing authorities have what they call preferences. These preferences determine your priority. This is why some people you may know get vouchers quicker and others may languish for years, if not decades. Out of all things that you can learn about, this should be your number one priority, actually, is learning about these preferences because if your case matches these preferences, then it's highly likely that you'll do very well on a waiting list, provided that each housing authority that you deal with has funding specifically addressing these particular preferences. So, how do you determine those? Well, first, you'd want to get with the PH or Public Housing Authority and then request their administrative plan and then identify those preferences. The waiting lists do open. To the general public, it does not mean that everybody that applies is actually going to receive anything or anything anytime soon. So, trying to understand what each PHA has to offer and which priorities are most important is going to be critical to your success. Before we get started, my name is Jay. I am the owner of Section8Consulting.com, and I'm going to switch over screens real quick for you guys. That way, we can put up a little bit of information. Let's see here. There we go. So you can see, if you look up, you'll see me in the bottom right, and then of course our phone number, email, and our company website. My office is by appointment only. Okay, please do not send text to my office. But beyond that, let's pull up some notes. This will help for those of you that want to, with a little bit slower learners, and I'm putting this up here. You can also find our notes. Which will also be in the bottom of the description as well as the comment section after this video is over. So as we move on, the first people that are generally in the highest consideration are people that are experiencing extreme homelessness. A housing authority may prioritize individuals and families who meet specific definition of homelessness. Look, I'm not going to get into the definition of that today. It has very special federal requirements for that, but cases can be built and wrapped around that preference. Having that is extremely important to your case, especially if you want to be considered very quickly. Live in an emergency shelter, live in a place not intended for human habitation, or fleeing domestic violence, working with the Continuum of Care program, which is a separate federal program. It is not your local housing authority. To be clear, guys, the Continuum of Care receives federal funds and it operates outside of the jurisdiction of the local housing authority, and it issues vouchers like rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing, and the emergency housing voucher. Also, to be very clear, guys, look, just because you're not homeless doesn't mean that your case is going to fail. We're only going over the first thing so far. Moving on down our list, we're going to look at people with disabilities. I get a lot of people call me, oh, well, I'm 62 and I'm disabled, therefore I believe I should be number one. No, not really. Okay. It is never a single preference that's going to get you to the top of the list or make you of higher consideration above one person or another. It is a combination of factors, and often those factors have to be multiple preferences. And in this case, having a disability certainly gives you another. It gives you a better position on the list, adding that into your case. So the housing authority may create a preference for families that include a person with a disability. However, if it cannot limit that preference to people with particular diagnoses or types of disabilities. Disability by itself does not create an automatic nationwide Section 8 priority. But let me tell you this about disability. They only consider disability as a whole once. Just because you've got 13 different types of disabilities, including physical and mental, does not matter. It only counts once if you have one of many different factors that are considered a disability. Let me go ahead and get a rumor out the way. And you do not need to receive a Social Security disability payment from the Social Security Administration to prove disability. That is one federal agency. We're talking about HUD and its federal agency, and its standard of what a disability is much lower than the standard would be for you to go to court and then be seen by a judge and then be determined disabled. So don't confuse the two. HUD's idea of disabilities are much lower, therefore, a lot more of you could qualify as disabled. Moving on there, elderly homes. Let's be clear in the term of elderly, it just simply means somebody that is the age of 62 and older. That is it. If they have that preference, then it will definitely help your case. Working families. Now, I want to dispel a few rumors here when we talk about working families. Look, you can work and live locally all day long. It only accounts for a small portion of preference. In fact, a person can actually not even exist or live in that state and have more preferences than a person that actually lives in that jurisdiction and do much better. So you don't need necessarily to believe that working and living locally to that housing authority is going to help you any more than any other person. Okay, again, it's a combination of factors. Now, if you added that with disability, being a senior, and other factors, then you have a pretty powerful case. But living and working locally only helps a little bit, maybe a 5% of consideration. Moving on down the list, we got local residents and workers. I think we've already kind of discussed that. And then moving on, number 6, we have veterans. So almost every administration has had good policy and preference for that for veterans. For those that are veterans that are homeless, you would go on a continuum of care program under what they call HUD-VASH. If not, you would be granted a veteran status under HUD's HCV, and under that, veterans would receive local housing authority. If it has adopted that preference, they can push you through a HUD-VASH of homeless if the applicant applies under another homeless disability preference or has special funding or special use vouchers, which is another story in itself. Number 7, survivors of domestic issues. Because of YouTube's policies, I'm not going to mention everything you see in these notes here, but I will put it in the description. A PHA may establish a waiting list for survivors of federal regulation and state that the housing authority should consider adopting such a preference. BAWA protections do not automatically mean every survivor moves to the top of the list. Let's be honest, guys. Domestic issues do rank number 1 out of all considerations and can actually propel you directly to the top of the list. But there are many different requirements. So I advise taking a look at Code of Federal Regulation, Title 24, CFR 982.207B and subsection 4. Don't worry, I'm going to link that up for you guys so you can see what actually meets that criteria, evidence required, and so on. Moving on there, number 8, people displaced by government action or disaster. And again, government action or disaster. Some housing authorities prioritize families displaced by government acquisition or redevelopment, the demolition, rehabilitation of assisted housing, a declaration of national disaster, or it can be national, state, or otherwise county. If they condemn the property as unsafe, public housing conversion or relocation, and certain HUD-approved housing actions. In other words, there is a wide list of things that can be considered if you're displaced, but it must meet federal requirements there. Number 9, families facing involuntary displacement. And involuntary means you had no other option there. So depending on the administrative plan, qualifying circumstances might include a court-ordered building closure, DV, or domestic issues, a fire or national disaster, government condemnation, and then owner action outside the tenant's control. So that's an important one. Owner action outside the tenant's control. So change of ownership may push people out of a building. Loss of housing and connected to government programs, and ordinary lease expiration, non-payment, eviction, or voluntary leaving of housing may not qualify. It depends a lot on your circumstances. I would advise, guys, if you go down this rabbit hole to understand these things, but you might want to reach out to my office, talk to me about it, because there's a lot of policies and procedures that are implied in this. But if you get it right, if you get this right and you build your case the appropriate way, you may find that your waiting times can be much shorter. You combine that also with some of my previous videos where we discussed top 20 states of the shortest waiting lists, and then we went further in to tell you how to find all these waiting lists through legitimate sites that don't put you at risk of fraud. I think a combination of those efforts would also yield a really good result. So it's a combination of a lot of understanding, education, as well as understanding administrative plans, and also policy and procedure for preferences to prioritize you. Blindly signing up for a waiting list is a terrible idea. You've got to educate yourself so you understand what's going to give you these greater preferences. So, and then number 10, we have families with extreme low income. That usually means people that are below the 50% AMI, 30% AMI, and 50% AMI. The lower you go, the more that it definitely gives you a preference. Though I will say that extreme low income which is going to be anywhere from 50% AMI or area median income or below, is going to give you the highest preference for that singular issue. Participants in special programs, which many of you, we've not gone over this yet in any of the videos, but special use vouchers. So PHAs may establish preferences connected to local initiatives. So each housing authority in America, of the 4,300, sometimes they're in cities where things are rather difficult. And so they put in citywide initiatives that may address a particular class of people. I don't mean particular races. What I mean is people that are having a specific struggle in that city. And so those initiatives may allow or compel you much higher on the list, depending on your circumstances and, of course, the merits of your case. So looking at that, we have permanent housing transitions, emergency housing voucher transitions, family unification, foster youth and independence vouchers, mainstream vouchers, witness protection and public safety programs, homeless prevention programs, and local support service programs. So as you can see, there are a lot of localized, specialized, special use vouchers depending on funding and what's been determined under administrative plan, which is generally filed with the HUD. So let's talk about and dispel rumors, many of which were generated in the news during the 80s, and many of you still carry these prejudicial thoughts. And so I'd like to give some clarity to this. You having children is not going to affect whether you go up or down a waiting list, okay? Being a single parent isn't going to do anything for you. Being pregnant, just because you're receiving SSI or SSDI, being elderly, being disabled, being a veteran, living in a shelter, facing eviction, paying more than 50% of your income, having no income, experiencing overcrowding, living in unsafe housing, waiting for years, having a serious medical condition, or being approved. These things seemingly are not going to have that much effect, but in combination of multiples of these, this can actually have a very serious impact on how well you do on your wait and on that waiting list. So how applicants are ranked is preference hierarchy. One of the preference may rank above another. In other words, you may be very similar in disability and age to another person that has already got a voucher while you're straining for 2 and 3 years to get that voucher. Well, it comes down to their case preferences. It's probably the number one factor. Preference points. Applicants receive points for each qualifying preference. I tell you guys, it's a layered cake. The more you add to this, the better you do. And many of you automatically believe you don't qualify for many of these preferences because the way applications are designed is almost deceptive. And so you don't believe that's you. You don't somehow believe that you're homeless or this and that or on the verge of homelessness. Therefore, you don't believe that you need to select those boxes. Because you do that, you destroy your case. Unless you actually know the actual federal intent and what's required in federal law to meet that, you might be surprised that you need a lot more preferences than you might imagine. It's just the way that you're actually demonstrating your case to the PHA that may be terrible. And I've rebuilt a lot of cases to do a whole lot better. Day and time applicants with the same preferences are ordered by the application date. And so if your housing authority is running a lottery, look, there's no preference in the world that's going to help you. Lotteries do not apply, and you keep preferences. It just means anybody can win regardless of a weak or strong case. So I would tell you, that is just what it is. You're just a gamble. Targeting funding, a voucher may be restricted to a particular population. And so that goes into special use. And if you're lucky enough to have that in your waiting list at that housing authority and you happen to meet that criteria, then you'll do very well. Income targeting, the PHA must satisfy federal extreme low income admission requirements. So that's another reason why you need to read the administrative plan. A lot of, that's the thing. Everybody's signing up for all these waiting lists across America, but you don't actually know what they're funded for. The funding can change month to month, and so can the preferences. So it's really important to take the extra steps to find out what these are. That way you can look at your case and go, okay, do I really know the definition of what they consider disabled? Do I really know the definition of preference for what they may consider as high priority? And that's why you'd want to do that. All right, I'm going to pull the notes down here and tell you guys, if I had to look at those 26 years that I did consulting at the federal level, I can tell you things like DB or domestic issues, homelessness, being a veteran, being a senior 62 years and older, are probably some of the highest criteria you can get. Having one is okay. Having two is wonderful. Having three or more is you're going to do very well. And it also really does depend on the city and geographical area you're in. If you're in a state with a small population and a low demand, then you're going to do very well, like the Midwest in the US. Now, if you're up the West Coast or East Coast or in those circumstances, then you're going to be in a group of even a higher number of people that are all wanting the same thing that have a lot of preferences. Therefore, your case no longer is that good. So you would wait a little bit longer. Well, guys, it looks like we're at about 15 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up from here. Hopefully, this will give you at least the broad strokes of this. I'd encourage you to look a little deeper into the information. I'm going to put it in the comments section as well as the description, and then reach your own conclusions, okay? I've enjoyed talking with you today and hope to see you again. Bye for now.